I'm super excited to host Randall Stevens, CEO at Avail. I had the fortune of meeting him around 3 years ago at AC Tech New York event, and we met at a social. And he's so humble and supportive guy. And then I've been seeing the progress of Avail, the various components and features they are developing. And I thought I should definitely get him on the show, talk about his way of thinking, solving AC Tech problems, and he has a lot of wisdom to share. So thanks a lot for being on the show, Randall.
Great. Thank you. And I enjoyed, always love getting the chance to meet people in person. So it was fortuitous that we were both there at New York at that event together and got to spend a little time getting to know each other. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, it was great. And you graduated in like 1995, around.
91, actually 91 from architecture school in
Oh yeah,
1991. Yeah.
1991, and you have seen like the whole rise of Revit, AutoCAD, all the software. Uh, First, tell us like when you were graduating as a young Randall, what were your ambitions in the industry? What were you very excited about at that time?
Yeah. So the story I tell is that I'm the right age. I'm 56 years old, going on to be 57 this year. I'm the right age to have been born, at the kind of rise of the personal computer. So I was in junior high school, all of a sudden the first, computers became available. So just got to take advantage of that, had access to that. When I went to the university to start studying, I started engineering really because I thought I was interested in computer science and computers, but that was early enough. 1985 is when I started college. That there wasn't anything such thing as computer science. They put you in electrical engineering, so I was an electrical engineering major. That didn't last very long for me to figure out like this isn't what I thought this was going to be and not what I want to do. So I ended up switching to an architecture program and graduated. So while I was that's just to say that in the late 80s, while I was in architecture school, I got really interested in the computer side of it and I was using AutoCAD, but I was not drafting with it. I was building 3D models with it and rendering and, got enamored with anything to do with 3D and graphics and all of that. So, a lot of that I would just credit with the time was right. It was all brand new for somebody like me that was interested in that. That was a natural place for me to gravitate and spend a lot of, there wasn't many people that could teach you. So you really had to be self-motivated, right? I just had access to the resources at the university, and I basically would go to the computer lab and taught myself all this, spent, endless every wakeless hour, just kind of doing that. So that's how I got into the computer side of it. When I graduated, I started a company called ArcVision that was really, it was a services company. I knew how to do 3D graphics, knew how to build 3D models and do renderings and animations. And so I started ArcVision as a service, doing that. It was relatively low cost of entry to start a business like that. But by the late, because I was really, I did end up buying really expensive equipment like silicon graphics machines back in the day. And there was a piece of software, or animation software called Wavefront, which, I always tell the story. It's like the first workstation that I bought, silicon graphics, I bought a used 20 megahertz computer with 12 megabytes of RAM. And I bought it used for like $25,000. That's how
Whoa.
expensive computers were back then, with that kind of horsepower. And then the software, I bought the first license of Wavefront, which was at the time kind of one of the mainstays in high-end computer graphics. I think I paid $32,000 for the license, of that software, right? So it was, $60,000 investment just to have one computer. So I say that the resources were a lot more expensive back then, but what that had me doing was really working on how can I, what parts of the modeling and animation process do you need to do on this expensive computer versus what you could do on a cheap computer, like a PC with AutoCAD. So you could do all the modeling, not on this expensive thing. You do that on the cheap equipment, and you got time on it, and then you reserve basically all the time that you need to do the graphics processing on the expensive equipment. So that got me into like, how do I move data between here? How do I translate it? How do I get data from this application to that application? And just lots of kind of digging in and trying to get those workflows. So by the mid 90s, 95, I actually came up with what became what ArcVision's mainly known for, is called RPC. There's a content technology that it started out with people. I was trying to figure out, how do I put people in animations? And so that was I I had this like little epiphany. Literally, I can remember the evening I was at dinner with my wife, and I was on a Friday night, and I was thinking about this, and a bunch of things just kind of clicked. And I'm like, I think this would work. So I go back to the office that weekend and start writing some code to test this theory, and it like worked. And I'm like, holy crap, this is like, so that was the very origins of what became the RPC technology. And of course it got applied not just to people, but trees and foliage, and still around. Actually, Corey Rubidoux still own that company, but Corey Rubidoux is the CEO now, and been doing a lot of amazing things. The kind of second, third generation of that technology. It's to me, it's amazing. It's been around for 20 years now. It's like pretty cool. But anyway, so I'm rambling.
Yeah. So like, just to clarify, is like RPC the remote procedure call, or it's a different RPC? Oh.
No, and that was always a interesting bit of trivia. The RPC like tech that you see in Revit for the trees and foliage. Yeah, in programming language, yeah, in computer speak,
Huh.
there's an RPC that's a remote procedure call. But when we first named that, we were doing, it was a way to put people in the animation. So the file
Mm.
extension was .rpc, and that stood for real people content. The
Oh.
original product was called Real People. And then as soon as we figured out, like, hey, this isn't just people, you can actually do trees, we had to change the acronym to not be about people. So we changed the acronym to stand for Rich Photorealistic Content. So that became what RPC in that world became. But anyway, it's fun. It's kind of it was a crazy fun time to be doing. Just so everything, that whole 90s in graphics was exploding. And SIGGRAPH, I did 19 years straight going to SIGGRAPH
Whoa.
conference. Yeah. So it was and especially in the 90s, it was I always described it to people that SIGGRAPH, which is a big graphics conference every year. What made it, I think, special was like graphics. I would always describe it as, in the same conference and room, you had scientists from NASA and French tattooed artists all in the same room, and excited and talking to each other about, art, science, technology, graphics. Kind of brought everybody together. So it was an exciting, fun time to be involved with it. So
Yeah, I went last year in LA, and it was a 50-year anniversary. And like, you meet like so many interesting people, like the co-founder of Pixar, or the person who developed raycasting algorithm, and
yeah,
you get so much inspiration
I,
from that conference.
I remember I have a picture of myself with the guy who invented the LED.
Ooh.
Yeah, like it's like people like that you end up meeting at these things. It's like, wow, that's like that's a pretty important thing, right?
Yeah. And when you mention about that idea of RFC on a Friday night, like which year is this?
Oh, that was in 95,
95.
1995.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
so
see.
almost 30 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
crazy.
Actually, and I'm very curious to know. So you saw the BIM wave, cloud wave, iPhone wave, and what were some of the things you thought this could become big, and things that were right, and things that didn't turn out as per the adoption or like distribution?
Yeah, great question. So the other thing, when I graduated from architecture school, I started ArcVision, but I also started teaching. So I was just teaching part time, like computer classes like this in the program, the architecture program where I graduated. So I taught from 1991 to 2007. So in the 90s, I was mainly using AutoCAD, teaching 3D modeling techniques with AutoCAD, and then using usually 3D Studio is a rendering application. And then I don't know if it was me or the technology, but by the time about 2000, let's just call it 2000 timeframe, I'd been teaching for a decade by that point, and what I felt like was that the time it took me to get a student, an architecture student, right, even being able to model, just seemed like it took longer and longer. The software kept
Mhm.
getting more and more complicated, right? If you were doing the stuff in 3D Studio or some, the software kept getting, quote unquote, better, but that also meant the learning curve was steeper and steeper just to even do basic things. And some of that could just, maybe that was part me, right? But also I think it was a combination of the product getting more complicated. So that tends to happen with software products over time. As the pressure is on them to advance, they get more complicated, and that makes it harder for somebody to start using them.
Mm.
So about that same time is when SketchUp came into the market. So that was really what I could point to and say, besides AutoCAD obviously having its influence starting in the 80s, rendering software kind of coming about. 3D Studio was an important piece of software in the 90s for visualization. Lightscape in the early days, I was an early Lightscape customer. Rod Recker, I don't know if you know Rod. Rod was one of the original founders of the Lightscape software, but it was the first, right, real beautiful photorealistic rendering using a technique called radiosity. But I was around, that kind of stuff in the 90s. But when SketchUp came about, I actually got to witness it. Like I would be at these conferences, and all of a sudden SketchUp showed up on the scene.
Mm.
And to me, what was so exciting about it, it was very simple. It was, you could start modeling. You didn't, and I would see, at the time, I have to be careful now because I'm getting close to this, but I would say, you know, it used to just be the young 20 somethings that were getting excited about this stuff. All of a sudden you had 60-year-olds, that had been an architect their whole career and had completely missed the whole AutoCAD and all that stuff, and were maybe at the, towards the end of their career. All of a sudden SketchUp was a very approachable, usable piece of software for those people, and I was kind of witnessing it. So to me, that was like maybe one of the major pivot points, and also a realization that if you're building software, ultimately, yes, you can be very technical about it, but if you really want to impact, you've got to make it simple enough that the most number of people, it's very approachable and the most number of people can use it. So I've really, if you're trying to sell a product, what you want is the most number of customers. So really concentrated the last 20 years. Same with Corey, who I said is running ArcVision now. We both are big believers in, we call it the democratization of these kinds of technologies. You have to make it simple and make it simple enough, and that's your job, is to simplify it enough that actually makes it usable by the average person in the industry. So I think that that's an important uh, kind of thing that I've seen. And then of course in that same time frame, Revit all of a sudden came about. So I was early, before Autodesk acquired Revit. We were working with the Revit company and integrating ArcVision's RPC technology in a lot of those platforms. So same with Rhino. So we were involved with a lot of those companies as they would build those pieces of technology in the early days of trying to integrate our technology with them as well. So
So you could foresee like in 2000, like SketchUp could be big based on the increasing adoption among like different set of people. But so like if I were to ask like two or three more predictions at that time, you were thinking like, okay, maybe computational design, or like what are some things you thought could be bigger by 2020 or 2030?
oh, there's no way we could think out that far, right? You're lucky to like think out a year ahead, right? But I think the trends were, you know, still back in the early 2000s, visualization was still
Mm.
something that somebody in the firm did over in the corner. So it wasn't really until, you know, you probably can actually, SketchUp allowed, because it was it's not really a rendering application. It's a modeling application, but it kind of had its own style, and it let people, produce images. And so I think that was probably the first taste of people being able to actually not only model, but kind of get a graphic output. the designer doing it instead of a specialist that was doing the visualization. And then you can probably, I mean, there's obviously a lot of rendering applications, but it was really, I'll credit the guys, the founders of Inkscape, really in the mid when they start that 2015, 16 timeframe, on the back of Revit ramping up and becoming now kind of mainstay, which, that started in 99 to 98, 99 was the founding of Revit. And I think Autodesk bought it in 2003 or four timeframe. And it really even took Autodesk, as big as Autodesk was, it took them more than a decade, more than 10 years to actually get it like
Mm.
that it was kind of, probably, I would say turning point was in 2013, 12, 13 timeframe. You started to see it in adoption. So then along comes the guys that started Inkscape in 2015, 16, and that was an add-in that again made it really easy. Push of a button, you could like see your model and rendering and running around it in real time. So those democratization of access to those kinds of technologies, I think, were kind of the critical points in this progression. Could you predict that? Maybe. I mean, I guess when we were doing it, we were trying to make it cheap and easy enough that for the most people to use. We weren't, there wasn't any desire to try to keep it, to yourself. It was like, hey, can we make this easy enough for the average person to use? But yeah, really hard to think out too far in the future. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, especially with like this exponential AI wave, Moore's law. Like, who knew? Like within 2 years, from like blurry images, we get like photorealistic images, like mid-journey. Like,
Yeah, I think it probably, and you can look back over critical changes in technology. I think I think the average time for something new to hit the scene and then like completely maybe shift a market is usually about 7 year time frame for adoption and entry. And you can look back at over the last 150 years at different kinds of technologies that came about and how long it took for that to like, okay, when the car came about, how many years did it take to displace completely, it's like about a 7 year span. And I think you see that. And that's probably just more to do with it takes a lot of inertia for something new people don't want to change. So that's the status. And so what something new comes around, it's like, okay, this is going to take a while for people to finally get the value or to see enough. So it's usually a few years for those of us that are, wonks and the technology. Of course, we jump on it and think everybody's just
yeah,
going to, it's going to change everything tomorrow. So even with everything that's going on in AI and machine learning now, a lot of exciting new opportunities. We're, starting to plot out and get glimpses for what we think is next and how that's going to change things. But the reality is it'll take a few years for that to really, reach widespread adoption. Like
got
I still teach. I teach a class in the business school, an entrepreneurship class. I've been doing that for the last 10 years. And I'm amazed, like even, I follow pretty closely like SpaceX and what's going on with that kind of technology. And I'm just amazed about how much like college students today aren't really paying that much attention. So to me, it's like
Mm.
even engineering students, it's like they kind of know what's going on, but they're not, they're busy doing whatever they do when they're in college and what I did when I was in college. But it's like they're just not really that tuned in to what's going on. And those of us that are out here in the business world are watching this stuff and going, oh my gosh, these are game changing innovations that are happening, bringing the cost of getting stuff into space, reusable rockets, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's also a testament when you can see that like the average person just really isn't paying that much attention to that stuff, which means, okay, it's not like it's gonna, I mean, that's not a tech that the average person can do something with immediately, but
I see your point. And lastly, on like the past, any other Friday night ideas which you didn't get time to build apart, like, and you were busy in Arc Vision or building Avail, and you wish it's an interesting opportunity.
yeah, no real epiphany moments like that one was, and maybe it even you can tell yourself stories in hindsight. So I'm always, thinking about how things came about or what the time frame was. And even that one may be a made up story, but I can
Mhm.
kind of remember one night at dinner, like thinking about something that kind of two things I was thinking about kind of came together. And I was just thinking in my head, I'm like, you know what, that might work. And it was kind of
Mhm.
this one moment that I can look back on. Um, more so as I was involved with not only, helping to, I've always been heavily involved in the product side of the products that we're building, but also just running the company. So, building a company is a whole different, animal than building a product. So those are, you can do one and not be very good at the other. So there's a lot of just, how do you build a company and build a business around some of these things is as big a challenge as, I'd say as building the technology itself. So I've spent a lot of time, right, trying to build businesses during this time too. I think like now, when these when a new technology like what's going on with the AI machine LLMs and vector based search and these things that are coming together now in new ways, I tend to try to like, okay, I got to dig in enough to understand it, and then try to think about how it's going to impact, could impact. So we're doing a bunch of research and kind of
Mhm.
experiments here, so that's always exciting time. Kind of keeps you thinking, but no real epiphany moments.
Mhm.
I'm trying to figure out for Avail. We're doing a bunch of like we're building a chat bot right now, and part of what I've tried to think about is what is the general problem, or how are people going to use this? How would customers in our market use this? And then try to think about what the problems that they're going to have, and then can we help solve those problems? So to me, what's interesting about this new technology is my claim, and even the claim, what I would claim about the reason that we started Avail was every time somebody builds a piece of software, I don't care what it is, whether it's Revit or it's Chat GPT or Midjourney, you're going to end up having a content management problem, because if you're producing output, that output now becomes voluminous, and humans have to figure out how to get back to it, right?
Mhm.
And you could claim that you can just do a search for it, but that's not, you're not always just doing a Google search for everything. It's like, no,
Mhm.
people still use folders to organize things. You want things in these kind of logical organizational structures, and you want to be able to get back to them quickly. So a lot of the reason that we started Avail was this recognition that, hey, if you're in an architecture and engineering firm and you're using dozens, sometimes 100 different kinds of applications, you don't want 100 different ways to organize your information. You want one way to do it so you can get back to it no matter what software that you're using. So I think the same principle is going to apply to what's going on with these AI, both on the image generation side as well as text or any kind of any kind of you know anything that you want to do to talk to like a chat bot. So there's two sides of it, or kind of the theory that I'm trying to form in my head is that you get fewer, the more you constrain the information that you feed into this AI engine, the more accurate the information you're going to get back. The broader, the more information you give it, the more confused it's likely to get and give you bad information or not good information. So that in itself tells me that there's a content management challenge, which is what information is feeding this. That has to be managed and updated. So for as an example, when we started working on this internally, our first experiment was, let's take our own training and knowledge base information of how to use Avail, use that as the input to the chatbot, so you can have a helper chatbot, like, how do I do this in Avail, or how do I do that? So it's work. I keep using the words compelling. It's like it works, but at the same time, you can ask it things, and it's like, well, I know that wasn't a very
Mhm.
good answer. So now you got to go back and figure out, well, did we either not have good information that we fed it? Were there holes in the information that we fed, and we have to go plug those holes? Were there things that are now old and outdated? So that's one of the challenges with software is, if the software is always evolving and the interface is changing. Anytime that changes, that means all the old videos that you created to show somebody what to do, that's like, that button's not there anymore. Like that
Mhm.
video is now no longer relevant. So there's this constant upkeep that has to have with information in a world like this, that becomes a content management problem.
Mm.
So we're trying to figure out now, is Avail well suited, because it is at its core a good content management platform, to put this kind of technology on top of it, and then think about using Avail to manage that source information into these bots. And so anyway, that's what's kind of going on here as we think about this and experiment with it in these what I would call early stages. So
I really like the point you mentioned that because like when we see these AI videos, okay, dump your PDF, it's gonna extract knowledge and talk. But like with LLM, it's also like the more noise you put in, the garbage in, garbage out. Like so you have like your domain expertise layer. Okay, instead of just dumping a web page, I'll filter out only the necessary text or tag content in the retrieval, so it's only focusing on the right information. Like this data
exactly.
cleaning, we have so much unstructured data, so like what, how to clean our AC data to be of useful value and extract business value out of it. It's also a big challenge.
Yep, big challenge. Yeah, you're right. This industry is largely unstructured data, so much unstructured data. So that's been a lot of what we're trying to do with Avail, is to help. We use the word context a lot. All this information doesn't have much context. So it's like, how do you get it in some structure? How do you give it more? I use a diagram where I show like that all of Avail's features are all about rings of context. It's like the better information, the better context we have, the easier it is to like find something or pinpoint a piece of information if you've got the right context. So that's just the way we think about it. And I think, that's going to carry through. I always, when I'm just recently, obviously talking about this more publicly, it's like the example I give is everybody by this point's probably used ChatGPT in, the free version or paid version. But it's like, all you have to do is look at that left-hand column and say, how many of those have to be going on before you've got a content management problem? How do I get back to the one
Mhm.
that's, number 67 or 667 down that list? Now all of a sudden, how do I group those? How do I put these in some kind of logical way to get back to it? Yeah, I just I think there's just new, we're producing more and more information now. So it's like now there's even bigger management
Mm.
problem of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, like the relationship has also like huge knowledge information. And I think you mentioned Avail on a higher level. Like, can you walk us like the early days of Avail? What was the idea? How you build the team? How much time it took from the idea to the MVP?
Yep. Yeah, good question. So Avail started as a product being developed inside the other company, ArcVision. I ended up spinning it out as a separate company, had enough of its own needs and inertia to be separated from what was going on at ArcVision. But as I said, that was, ArcVision was in the content business largely with that RPC technology. It had become, popular and was used. We had lots of different, all the major platforms had integrations for it, had customers largely in the architecture world around the world using that technology. So I got a little bit of a unfair start, because as we began thinking about what Avail became, we kind of had access and knew, the market and knew who some of the potential customers were. But so ArcVision began back in 2009 timeframe, built a content management piece of software specifically for the RPC technology that was called Dashboard. So anybody that was been around in that time frame probably remembers that we put out this interface for organizing libraries of these, content, people, trees, cars, all that kind of stuff. And we went through a couple of iterations of different technology stack to build that piece of desktop software. But one of the learning in there was when we would tag the content, actually began using key value pairs to basically organize those tags. So it was like a parameter in Revit where it's like, what's the Revit category doors, Revit category casework, or Revit, so early we were, tagging things, but letting the tags have structure. And the interface for that, we kind of, were early. We kind of innovated a way to use that to organize and get to this information. So I would claim that that was probably at the core of starting to think about what became Avail, and that there was a need for structured information in a way. But then also, because we were developing and spending engineering resources to build that dashboard product instead of the core RPC technology, that was the other epiphany that I had, which was like, anybody developing any software ends up getting drugged over trying to solve these content management problems, by nature. So, and if I'm an architecture client and we knew what all the different pieces of software, it's like, you don't want 15 different interfaces to get your stuff from. I don't want a different interface for Inkscape that I'm using for Revit that I'm using for this. It's like, I want this to be simple. Back to, this should be one interface where I need this kind of content or this kind of information. I want one interface to do that. So that was the kind of core thought around, starting this idea of Avail. The reality of we kind of had that dashboard product, but then when we started saying, well, this maybe has a life beyond this RPC technology, that was in 2013. I can remember I had a PowerPoint deck. It's usually how I start things. It's like, I'll do some, I'll sketch out some interface in PowerPoint or something, right? And be like, here's the idea. And I went to Autodesk University in 2013, and a guy named Jose Barrero who used to work at Gensler, and I knew from the graphics world. And I ran into him in the hall at Autodesk University, and I was like, I'm sorry, I said Jorge Barrero. He's now, I think he works with HKS, but at the time he was with Gensler. So I run into Jorge, and I said, hey, you got a second? Let me show you this. So I opened up my laptop, and I'm like, let me just show you this. This was in, November 2013. And he was like, this is really interesting. I know there's a team at Gensler that's thinking about this right now. Let me put you in contact. So I get back, and I've got the record of all this. In February of 2014, then I end up on a call with a small team at Gensler, and they were sharing that they were internally trying to figure out this broad problem, which is, how do you manage all of this stuff across a large organization like this? So I'm, of course, like feverishly, taking notes from what they're telling. And, the first stuff was like, we need to manage not just this Revit content, but all the graphics content and the photo, all this long laundry list of things that they wanted. And they wanted one way to manage all that. I'm like, that's exactly what we're trying to build. So this is 2014 timeframe. So we started writing a little code that year, 2014, but really, and some of it was like, whenever you're writing, developing a piece of software, you're deciding what technology to use to develop that software. So that's always a challenge too. So sometimes you'll like start with one tech, but in software world, these things change quickly too. What's in vogue? What's the programming language that you're going to use? What tools? What's the development platform that you're going to use to do these kinds of things? So we had gone through a couple of iterations of testing, thinking about some different tech, and really Zach Jones, who's our lead engineer, started working with some new tech, and he built a little prototype, and it was like, this is probably the direction. So in 2015, we actually started in earnest developing what became Avail. It took us a year to really write the first version of that, and by early 2016, we were kind of ready to start beta testing. So we spent most of 2016 in some beta testing with about 40 companies that started using, that we had in a kind of test cycle. And then we launched the product kind of commercially first quarter of 2017, and, started taking off. And we count probably about a third of the top 200 firms in North America as customers now, including the two largest firms in the world are customers. Gensler and Perkins Will are customers, but long list of nice customers who are using this to manage their. And it doesn't have, you don't have to be a big company. We've got, people using one license of it, but it tends to work for companies that need to scale. So
Oh
did I
man.
answer your question? I know that was a
No,
ramble
no,
too.
that's
That's kind of how that came about. Yeah.
that's really like it shows like how much time took to
Oh,
build from the eye. It's and
it
especially
does not happen overnight. It does
yeah,
not. You've got to be like in it for the long haul. It's like
yeah. I think like also from your previous company, you've seen the business in the side, the amount of time it takes to close a deal in big companies is also like sales cycles could be longer. It
nine
requires
months.
different nine.
9 months if you're lucky. 9 to 18 months, right, to do and that was a big change. This business was way different than ArcVision's business. ArcVision's business was largely credit card transaction over the internet, largely self-serve. There was no salespeople. Avail was a different animal.
Mm,
We have sales team. The sales cycle is, like I said, 9 to 18 months sometimes. Sometimes you can close things, shorter. We're always trying to figure out if we can shorten the sales cycle, but big implementations, more expensive sales process that's involved. So way different companies, right, in the way that you have to build those and think about them.
interesting. And is it funded or bootstrapped?
Oh, so early days, largely bootstrapped. I was able to do it, out of the cash flow. Got most of the product, at least the first version of the product, built, bootstrapped. But then when we were ready to go to market, I
Mm,
did begin needing some outside money, and that's part of the reason that we spun it out into a separate company, was to
mm,
be able to give us the ability to do that. Um, but we raised a little bit of money in 2016, 17 timeframe, friends and family, will
mm,
traditionally be called a friends and family kind of round. And then that got us going. And then luckily we started, we had customers coming. I always counsel, it's like, if you're an entrepreneur and you're building a product, the best money you can get is customer money. Get people
yeah.
buying your product, because it's that revenue that comes in that's the lifeblood, right? I mean,
Mm,
ultimately you don't have a company if you can't figure that out. But we were able to take very little money and get, we were probably undercapitalized. I tend to always be,
mm,
not trying to raise too much capital. It's like keep it close at hand, as close as you can. But we did end up raising some more money in 2019, about
mm,
6 months before the pandemic hit, which was good
mm,
timing. But that money was more like we were being successful and we needed more money to try
mm,
to grow faster. And so that was really helpful during the pandemic time, because things really flattened out for about
mm,
18 months. The market just, was not very good
mm.
during the, 2020 through, halfway through 2021 into the end of 2021. And then things kind of took back off again. But a little bit of money, right? We're,
Mm.
and the company's healthy now, so we don't have to raise any more money if we don't have to. So
God. And it's always like I see a lot of because of the VC world and startup. Sometimes a startup takes 5 years or 7 years to become profitable, and
yes.
like having good, healthy business cash flows is a challenging part. So it's like
Yeah, it's challenging when you're, the latest business model is, software as a service, SaaS. So it's a
mm,
subscription model,
mm,
right? And you see the same thing. These business models come and go, right, in and out of vogue. But that's been the business model of choice, right, for the last 10, 15 years. And what's not understood about that, maybe by outsiders who don't understand the dynamics, the financial dynamics of it. It's called a J curve. So in the earliest stages, when you're launching this, yes, you got money coming in, but because it's a subscription model, it used to be that you pay, I'll use like Adobe. You used to go out and buy a copy of Photoshop for $650.
mm,
So if you think about from running a business, it's like, okay, you gave me $650. You move to a subscription model where it's like, now you're going to use the same piece of software, but you're going to pay me $50 a month. Well, now I only get $50, or 25, whatever the number is, $20 a month. I'm only going to get $40 a year, which means it's going to take me 3 years over time to get the same amount of cash. Instead of the cash being up front, the cash comes in a little bit of a time. So it changes, completely the dynamic of what it means to run a business. And as you're starting to acquire customers, you measure what's called CAC, CAC, customer acquisition cost. So how much does it cost? I already said with Avail, it takes us 9 months to a year and a half to get a big customer on board. Well, during that time, before you've gotten any of their money, you got to be paying your salespeople and your marketing people, and you have to be in business. So in the early stages of a company, you're losing money, right?
Mm,
And that's why you usually have to have outside money coming in. And so you're losing money, right, for some period of time. What happens though is, but if your customers stay on subscription and you're building up, think of it as like an annuity, as you're building up and your cash now, they don't churn, they stay
mm,
customers. As you keep adding new ones over time, your revenue goes up, and it's all of a sudden that J curve
mm,
inverts and starts, now you get above the line and you're starting to, be profitable. But it's not unusual for companies that are growing to be spending, you want your customer acquisition cost, if you're lucky, to be equal to the first year of revenue just to acquire a customer. So you're losing money, and it takes years. So yeah,
mm.
unless you're an outlier, it's going to take 5 to 7 years just to even get out of that J curve. And so it takes cash to do that, it takes money to do that. And there are challenges. The other thing I'll say is I ran across a statistic that only 4% of software companies ever reach $1 million in revenue.
Whoa.
So
ARR. Right. Yeah.
yeah, 4%, only 4% ever get a product that generates more than $1 million in revenue. And then I think the number when you get to 10 million is 0.4%. So, right. So not very many companies get to a scale of where they can, have a team and doing these kinds of things. So it's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, like that's why, like, and a lot of people give up, like, first 2 years, 4 years, when they don't, like, and you started the seed from 2013 to this date. It's like you, I'm pretty sure there was a lot of ups and downs, and you had that resilience muscle. So kudos. And especially when you hear stories like Katera and other startup, where, like, a lot of, there's so many stories of failed startups in AC, and the customer adoption is very challenging because of the mindset. the the R&D budget is not there yet, like, although, like, all the other industries have good allocation. So even to sell a good $50 software per license, it takes so much of convincing for this customer
Takes a lot
segment.
of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use the general metric of, and I told you earlier I teach this class, so I try to instill this as I'm teaching this entrepreneurship class. But one, just because you can solve a problem, just because a problem exists and you can solve it, doesn't mean that you can build a business around that.
Mm,
Usually, um, in order to get people to change the natural state, which is to continue doing what I've always done, I think you can mentally think about that it needs to be like 10x better, not not one, not incrementally better. It has to be like this is going to completely change some dynamic. Otherwise, it's really hard to get to change. And then it takes a long time even at that to get that to happen. So there's another quote that I think in the AEC industry especially, it's very fragmented. It's a huge industry, but very fragmented, with lots of pieces and moving parts and complexity that's in it. If you're building a business, you love to think, hey, can I solve some big problem that gets this big industry to do something? The reality is that it's really complex. There's lots of different moving parts. It's hard. And the thing about, you may think that you've solved some problem or developed some product that you think is going to solve some problem, but you can't force it. And money doesn't help to force it. Sometimes it just takes time. So there was a quote from there's a VC in Southern California named Mark Suster that I followed for years. And he wrote a blog post 15 years ago that was titled, 9 Women Can't Make a Baby in a Month. Right? So you can't, some things take gestation time. Takes 9 months, takes 10 years, takes 7 years, takes whatever time frame it is. I can't artificially take money, even if I've got money or raised money, I can't accelerate that. It's just going to take that long. So I think that's something to be considered. Obviously, if you've got a product that's in the market and people are, coming at you fast, then that's when you do want to raise money and grow as fast as you can. But you can't take a new technology or idea, especially if you're having to educate the market. That's an expensive thing to do. And if you're you do not want to use venture money to educate a market. You're going to go out of
Mm.
business. I tell you that, right? It's like, that's not what that money's for. So.
Interesting. I'm very curious for this question. If you were to give a master class on AEC tech product pricing, uh, what are 2, 3 tips which you learned the hard way or from your experience you'd advise for other AEC tech founders?
Yeah, I think just general things like from the ArcVision side of things, where we were selling product like largely marketing effort on the internet, credit card transactions. Somebody comes, wants to buy it. What we learned there was, there are price points where somebody can either make the decision to do it, like
Mm,
an impulse buy almost, and or if you're in an organization, how much authority do you have to spend before you have to go ask your boss? So that's one thing to consider. And those, that obviously varies from company to company. But, what I found over the years was, $500 like on a credit card for somebody running a business is not that much money, right? It's like
mm,
you can spend that much. You start getting over $1,000 or more, it usually gets scrutinized a little bit more, right? And now somebody's going to have to go ask somebody, right? And now all of a sudden it's like more complicated. It's not just to go buy it. The other thing I learned over time there was you can think about in finance terms, things are what's called a CapEx expense or an operational expense. So if you're buying something, are you buying it because I'm going to use this like continuously as a core part of what we're doing? So if you were buying a license of Revit and you're an architecture firm, it's like that's a cap. You can
mm,
view that as a capital expense for operating. You're not really
mm,
buying it, but you're licensing it to use. But I'm going to use this on a lot of projects this year.
mm,
And that's different than if you're in a business where for that project, I need to use this and I can expense this to the client or charge it back somehow on the project. So in the architecture, design, and construction industry, you have to be really careful. Some people don't want that operational expense, to be able to, sometimes they can't go charge that back. But there are plenty of people that can go charge that back. Like, hey, I'm going to recover the cost of that for this project. An example that I would give, like with ArcVision's products was you could say, hey, for $500 a year, you can have, we moved to a subscription model back in the late 2000s. You can have access to all of this for $500 a year and then use it whenever you want, which, might get scrutiny. Do we really need that? Blah, blah, blah. At the very same time, you could be doing a rendering one afternoon for a client and it needs to get out the door, and you decided you needed something in that rendering and it's worth $500 just for that rendering, right?
mm,
So you have to really understand like the dynamics of why people are buying things and what's motivating them to buy it and what those price points are. With Avail, because we wanted this to be a core, we want Avail to become the core content management platform inside of these firms. So we decided to use it's licensed per user, but we do some interesting things, what we call enterprise licensing, where we basically don't want you to have to manage how many licenses you have. So it used to be called floating licenses, but we use a metric called average monthly users. So our customers can deploy Avail, use it as many. I like it because it puts we want to develop new features that you want more people using it more often. And if that's the case, then we should get paid more for that.
Mm.
But you don't have the tax on like managing users and all those kinds of things. So it tends to be a nice licensing model, kind of shared risk. Is the way we think about it. But anyway, I don't know if that was helpful, but
Yeah, and like to be specific, for example, like just like I know the strategy would be different for big companies versus small companies. So let's say, is free trial for 1 month better than paid one? But like it could also be like there's a lot of people who just want to try it out and then they are not the ideal customer, versus okay, getting 30% or 20% discount on get an annual package versus like monthly, so you have like more cash flow to run for that year or
yep.
something.
Yeah. So what I learned was over the years, one, discounting does not work. I never found it to work. You could you could offer some special, and all you're doing is kind of pulling future revenue forward a little bit at a discount. You
Mm,
can think about it as like a discounted cash flow calculation, but it doesn't incent. And I think that's mainly because when people are buying products like this in the industry, it's not their money, it's the company's money. So it's not like a consumer sale where it's like, oh, that's on sale and I'm going to impulse buy it because it's
mm,
on sale. So I just don't, I'm not a believer in discounting. I'm a believer in transparency of pricing, and everybody should know it should not be hidden. It should be very transparent what it costs, and we follow that ourselves. As far as like you can do volume, part of the way we do our licensing model is basically as you buy more, the cost per user goes down. So there's
mm,
volume discounting that can happen, and that works well because now you can have the same pricing for a 5-person firm as a 5,000-person firm, and all it is you're paying less as you buy more volume, but you start out. It's a very scalable kind of pricing model. Um, what was the other part of the question?
like free trial.
Oh, free versus so with Avail, we have a free version. And that was by design. We wanted that. We wanted to always have a free version. Uh, and the main reason is Avail has what's called the marketplace, which is third parties are also using Avail to distribute. So we knew there always had to be the ability for somebody to put Avail on their desk and get access to the third party, even if they didn't buy a license of Avail. So there was always built into it a free version of the software. We just didn't limit the feature set of what you can do for free. And then the goal was use it. I want you to use it, see what it is, and then be compelled. You're going to, we call it a paywall. You're going to hit up against that wall at some point, and then, okay, I have to now flip into a paid, and that's a common practice. There, I think there is something to be said for, like a 30-day trial of something. What it does is if somebody signs up for something like that, it one gives them a constrained window to say, I've got to go through my testing and evaluation process in this fixed amount of time. This can't just drag on forever because it's going to end in 30 days. And then there's this like, okay, was that enough time to do that? That's tough, right? In this market, it's like people get busy. They get busy on a project and don't have time to spend time like they thought. So we didn't use that model, but we've talked about it and what the pros and cons of it are. Yeah, I don't know if I can give good advice if one's better than the
Yeah,
other, but I think it depends on your product. Right.
yeah, I see. In like, how does a day in your life look like as a CEO?
Oh, so I like I said earlier, I'm still heavily involved with product. So I probably spend half of my time still like kind of wearing basically quasi product manager hat. I still love to talk to customers and people, so I try to spend as much time as I can. I've got calls this afternoon with customers and showing, I test stuff. It's like, I'm going to show you this. I want to hear what you think, and then, pull that back in and use that as part of the development process. And then there's just the running of a company piece of it, right? Not all of it. Luckily, I've got Jim Clifton is my chief operating officer, and he likes to, whenever he's describing his role and my role, it's like he does everything that Randall doesn't want to do, right? That's the way he describes it. It's like, so there's just parts of it that are like, okay, that's not the part that I'm necessarily good at or want to spend time on. So you got to have other people helping to do those parts. I'm very financially managed, or minded. So I keep close track on the financials, and obviously I've got some outside investors. So just yesterday I was sending out information to our investor group. So I do those kinds of things. I try to do these kinds of things, right? We have our own events that we put on. Actually, I'll mention that here. We do these things called Confluence events. We do, for the last 5 years, we have these invite-only Confluence events that happen in our hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, and those have been growing in popularity. But then last year we started doing regional events. So we've got one coming up, which are not invite-only. It's open for anybody that wants to attend. So we're on April 17th. We're in New York City. We're at the Brooklyn Navy Yard hosting a one-day Confluence event around AI and machine learning. And we've got speakers from Shop Architects, Thornton Tomasetti, Perkins and Will, Woods Baggett. So we've got a great curated group of people talking about from the industry, what's going on, how they're thinking about it. So if you're interested in AI and machine learning from your firm's perspective, and you're in the area or have the resources to come in for that, it's a great one-day event that we're hosting. You can go to the Avail website at getavail.com, and up at the top menu, you'll see Confluence. And if you go to Confluence, you'll see all of these. We call them professional development events that we host. So I spend a lot of time on that, help to curate the speakers. And so I spend a lot of time doing those kinds of things. I've been lucky to curate. I pick and choose the fun parts of it that I enjoy, and then I try to find somebody else to do all the other stuff that I don't necessarily want to do. But you have to do, and you end up, it's a small company, so you end up doing a lot of everything, right? Including taking the garbage out if it needs to be taken out, right? It's like,
Do you still get a time to code?
no, I was a hacker at best, so I've always had, for anything that became most of our products that were customer facing, I did, some web stuff when I was managing some of that on the back end, but most of the time I had developers that I was working with on the coding side. So I don't write like, I'm doing stuff now in, Power BI, information, management and retrieval, and, simple DAX. If you use Power BI, it's like,
Yeah.
I can script and do some of those kinds of things, but way out of my league for what my extended team's doing. Right. So know enough to talk to them about it and help them, think some things through, but they're the ones writing, all the core code. So.
Got it. And moving to the end of the interview, I know last time we chatted, you showed some amazing features at Avail, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to get the glimpse and share it with the viewers. What are the possibilities with Avail? So,
Yeah. If we want to
okay.
share my screen. So this is Avail. If I move this around, it's actually a piece of desktop software that runs on people's desks. One thing about Avail, if you haven't seen it or using it, it's very visual in nature. We spend a lot of time focused. A lot of the content in the AC industry is very visual in nature. We call these channels inside of Avail. But if I were to let's say that I was going to go into this channel around some Revit content, what you'll see is that, we call these key cards. This is all driven off metadata around the content that drives these interfaces. But if I go into something like my drafting views, I'll just use this to illustrate, this is very visual kind of information. It's like, yeah, you may be doing a search by words, but in the end, you want to see it. So even things like opening up a preview panel and seeing high-res preview of this before you've committed to opening it. So the way I describe our kind of mission with Avail is, our tagline is the information you need faster. It's like we're trying to help you get to the information you're looking for. And part of that journey is, search, browse, see, find, verify, right? Is this what I'm actually looking for before you commit to opening it in your piece of technical software or whatever. So we really focus on that kind of speed, but you can search across, if I was like looking for it, if I could spell jam detail, I can search for jam. And then what you're going to see is this was looking across all that information. And then across the top, team, I think, just did a really great job of like just the UI UX of like, we're searching across a very large body of information. It's like, so I'm going to bring you back results, but I have to bring back the context I found it so that you can easily filter down. So, you can see we use this channel metaphor, but it's like, look, we found things that match this in a lot of different places. So I can, now let you kind of use this other layer of information to, to kind of narrow down, what you're looking for. So if I were to come back out front, what I would call the front or home screen, if I were to type in something as, simple as blue, it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of things that might be blue, right? I've got RPC content, I've got materials that are blue. Obviously, I've got logos that are blue. Well, if you look across the top, you can see that this content was organized. So is it marketing related information that I'm trying to search across, or is it visualization content in a material library that's blue? And then if it's materials I'm looking for, I can double click and drill in to that materials channel and be like, well, are you looking for Revit materials or textures or V-Ray materials? Well, I'm looking for V-Ray materials. Well, here's all your blue V-Ray materials, right? So it's this kind of progressive, I always think of it as you're never going to like type in something and get right to. Our job is to get you close and then give you enough information back to say no, to narrow down with one or two clicks to what you're looking for. So that's in general what Avail does. We manage a lot of our firm's Revit libraries and content, but like I said, material libraries, Rhino assets, SketchUp assets, any of that kind of content can live in Avail. The other thing that's interesting about the way we develop this is the content. We don't take possession of the content or don't have to. So, I use this to illustrate. It's like content is now lives in lots of different places inside of these organizations, different cloud locations, different network locations. Avail has the ability for that content to stay living there, but unites it into one interface. So you can simultaneously, if I didn't put those labels on there, you would have no idea that this was in OneDrive and this was in Google Drive and this was over here at Ignite, this was on the local network or all these different places. So that's another unique aspect of what we do, which is why a lot of firms choose to use Avail. Is it gives them the freedom to store their content where they want to store it. I'll just show you a couple of other things. We have a plugin architecture that we've been developing for Avail, and I'm going to use ArcVision has a new product called Fovea. So here, you can turn on Fovea. What Fovea does is basically takes data from a native format like a Revit family or a Rhino model, and at a very, I'll just say a high level, translates that information, both geometry, but also textures and materials natively into about 14 different file formats, including, you don't see it on here, but Blender is a new one, which is becoming a popular visualization app. So it allows you to go back and forth from file format or, from application to application and automatically can translate this data. But what you see here on the right, this is what we call lens inside of Avail. So it allows third parties like ArcVision to actually integrate right inside of Avail, these web-based technologies, all part, that are around this core content management problem. And, you can do certain things inside this. And it's pretty cool because, not only can I do like objects like this, but, this is an entire Revit project. So this is the out of the box 2024 model. But, this is what Fovea does. That was an export from Revit of an entire project including the materials, textures, and everything, quote unquote, baked into this, into one format, that you can now bring this into Rhino and be doing other things in Rhino around one monolithic, something that was done in Revit and vice versa. So there's I think some really exciting things coming with how this is going to enable some new workflows between applications like SketchUp and Rhino and Revit, and the back and forth that has to happen. But from a technology standpoint, this for us is like if I'm peering into the future, a little bit, this we think is the future, which is, you don't want these different apps to be all over the place. You want them to start kind of coming together and work inside of and what this does from an Avail standpoint is it relieves this product. When it now publishes something, it's publishing into the Avail content management platform, not having to build its own content management platform on the back end. So that's kind of back to that original vision of what we're trying to do there. The other quick thing that I'll show you, I know we're running out of time, but I'll show you the like one of these chat bots that we're now kind of building and experimenting with. So this started with, if I go into one of these channels and just open up you'll see over here on the right, this is our first little chat bot. And this one is going to talk to just basically our help documents. So you could say things like, how do I add a tag to content? So I can type that question in, and the chatbot's going to, use our knowledge base to go find the answer to that. Hopefully, this might be on our dev server still, so it takes a second to wake up. But it comes back with an answer, but it also tells us, here's where I found that, how to add remove tags in our help database and get you back to it. So these were our first experiments, right? Pretty interesting. But what I'm going to show you here is we've been starting to experiment. So like here is another channel where I indexed PDF documents that are manufacturer documents, technical documents. So if I go open up one of these and show you, this is also built into Avail that we can find another piece of content. You can basically, I'm sorry, I'm in the cloud version. Let me go local. So if I open up one of these PDFs, what you'll see is in this viewer, we have built-in viewers for PDF and things like that. So again, I don't have to go open this up in some other piece of software. I can browse and see it. But the point here is, here's all these documents with all this rich information in it around manufacturer information, product information. So now this bot is specifically just looking at those 40 PDF documents. So I can do things like, I'll just give you, so like here's a pressure relief control from Clayval. So if I said, what's the product number for a Clayval pressure relief control? Let's see if it can answer that. So all of a sudden, it's like, can you see the name of that in this PDF? Like that is a 55L60. Well, look, the bot came back and said, the product number for our pressure relief valve is 55L60. And here's where we found that info, right? So, you can ask things like, what material is the relief valve on a, let me find a RWV. That's one of the manufacturers unit. This one may not. I'd have to go see if this is actually something. So there it came back and said the relief valve on this unit is made from lead-free brass, right? So we're beginning to start to, we've obviously been a search engine, so we're very interested in how this technology is going to change the way that people think about searching for information. But what I was alluding to earlier in the conversation was, what I don't want to do is ask that question in ChatGPT and get, maybe misinformation. I'm in control of these documents, and those companies maybe are in control of those documents. So I want to narrow where the information source where I'm asking this. So this is where, from our standpoint, it's interesting that we think Avail could be well suited for helping people inside of a firm, right? You can think about this as not some big monolithic IT service, but I call it like a business line service. The people that have the information are the people at their desk or smaller teams inside those firms managing this. So you want to put the tools in their hands to manage the information and use the both the inputs and the outputs. You've got to have software that lets them manage that. So we think Avail's well suited and in a good position right now. So we're working, diligently on some of these kind of new pieces of technology like this.
This is super amazing. Like one of the great use case of using a rag in AC. Like I'm seeing this chatbot for the first time, so I'm like, I know this is gonna be useful for sure. So
Yeah,
great, great word.
I keep using the word compelling. It's like there's something here, which usually if it smells like, if you get a sense that like this is interesting, then that's when it's like, okay, I'm going to double down. We need to keep digging into this and figure out where it's. So we're working with some customers slowly right now on. In fact, I've got a call that I've got to jump off this and get onto with a customer that's starting to experiment with this. So we're looking at like what information is inside the firm, what are the different use cases. So it's like, things like marketing and biz dev teams inside of architecture and engineering firms are always responding to RFPs. So it's like I've got history of RFP responses. Can I now take that by building type? And now when the next RFP comes in, I can use this kind of technology to say, here's the question. How would we have answered this in the past? And it gives you an answer. It's like, okay, we can like get more efficient at responding to these kinds of, this kind of information. So I really think that there's going to be this chance to really supercharge, people with faster. They can do more faster. It's an efficiency, gain.
Amazing. I know we have limit. The last one is, what is something which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to share on an ending note?
Oh, something. Um, Good question. Like in the industry or outside the industry?
Like any parting thoughts you think would be beneficial to the viewers
No,
on
well, I think it just along the lines of everything that we talked about. It's if you're developing and interested in developing software and technology in the industry, you know, love it because it is going to be a long haul. Be enamored by it, but we need and don't be afraid to fail. Just don't fail catastrophically. It's like take small bites. Nobody cares if something didn't work. It's like when you do get a hit, that's what people will remember. They won't remember you'll have to remind them of, remember when I tried that and it didn't work? And they're like, I don't care. They're like, nobody cares. What they care about is, are you doing things that are wins? And usually you don't get a win on your first swing at bat, right? It's like,
Mm.
you're going to have to diligently. There was a great blog post recently. Paul Graham is the founder of Y Combinator, one of the early, founders of Y Combinator. He puts out great essays periodically. He just put out in the last couple of weeks an essay called How to Start Google. And it was a talk that he gave to 14 and 15-year-olds. And it very much parallels my belief, which is you're going to be happiest in life if you're creating, not consuming. So if you can think about, I want to be a maker, I want to create things, I want to be infatuated with and thinking about things and creating things instead of wanting things or consuming things. I think that's one of the keys to happiness. And definitely his counsel to these 14 and 15-year-olds was, just do projects, just always find things you're wanting to work on. If you're a gamer, like get with your buddy and write your own game and then write another game. And it's like, don't worry too much that something's working or not working. Just always be making. And sometime you're going to make something and be like, this might be something that somebody else wants, or it's going to really solve a problem for somebody else. And that might be the 100th time you did it, or the 17th time you did it. But it's like, that'd be my counsel, is like, just keep making. You'll be happy. And at some point something will take off or catch, and uh, you'll have an outsized impact on the world if you can end up making something that a lot of people want, or it's going to help them. And that's a very fulfilling way to think about building things and helping people, right?
That's such an incredible thought to end the stream. I had a great time hosting you. Hope you have a great time with your customers and meetings the rest of your day. All right, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks